All right, so for this set of mixtures, I'm going to be using the Winsor Newton burnt sienna for my transparent red oxide, because the pigment that they use is actually transparent red oxide. It's PR101 and it's ground transparently. I'll just show you this little, I know I'm repeating myself, but this little chart. So this is another burnt sienna. This is Gamblin burnt sienna. It's not the same pigment, and it's duller. It's not as warm. This is Old Holland burnt sienna. It's a little more saturated, but not quite as warm or saturated as the transparent red oxide or the Winsor Newton burnt sienna. So they're both PBR7 instead of PR101. And then another example of a PR101 that is not the right color or transparency is this Old Holland English Red. It's also PR101 is the pigment, which is just basically an iron oxide red, but it is a little bit pinker. It's not as warm and it's not as transparent. So that is just kind of an overview of the complexity of pigments. Sorry if I was too high. This was the English Red. So you want to make sure that you're using something that says it's transparent red oxide, has that PR101 pigment, or it's a burnt sienna that has the same pigment and is transparent. I just want to emphasize that because if you get a burnt sienna that's not the same, it will make duller mixtures. And so just, you can still use it, but you'll have to adjust the way that you're mixing the skin tones. And you won't be able to get quite as chromatic in kind of the cheeks and the lips when we do our warm-cool study. So the first recipe I have for value 5, now we're trying to make the same value. So value is the lightness or darkness of a color. So we want to make approximately this an orange that has the same lightness as value 5, the same value as value 5 in the black and white. And sometimes that can be hard to tell with saturated colors, which is why it's nice to have a chart like the Munsell system. But I've tried to kind of indicate that here. So the way it printed, may not be exact. These will probably be more saturated in the printout than I'm going to be able to get in the mixtures with paint, and also they might be a little bit lighter than just the way they appear. So but we're gonna give it a try. So for value 5, we want 3 parts transparent red oxide and 1 part white. Let's see. So I'm just going to put this out and then divide it into 3. Again, these are not perfectly equal, but we're trying to get as close as we can. And then maybe I'll just squeeze out a little more white. It's maybe a little much. All right, so this should be value 5. So notice that with the value 5 for the gray, we only used 1 part black and 2 parts titanium white to get a mid value. But for the transparent red oxide, we have to add a lot more transparent red oxide to get it to a darker value. So that looks like it's close. It might be a little bit light, but we're gonna kind of go for it. I'll test it, but again, I'm not gonna do a lot of tweaking just because I understand that, you know, you may not have these charts to calibrate to. So I'm gonna get just as close as we can just by following the recipes. So I've gotta find my little strip here. Gonna test it. So, okay, so that's a little darker than the value 5 here, and it's a little bit less saturated, but again, it's like a step, kind of a step darker, which is what I was expecting. And then if I go to my Munsell chart and look at the value 5, so this should be approximately chroma 8. So this, you know, that may not make a lot of sense to you right now, but whoops. Okay, so that's actually pretty close. So it might be just a touch light, but it's really, really close. Now, you'll notice that one interesting thing about this pigment is that when you're mixing it just with white at higher chroma, higher saturation, more colorful, it's more reddish. And then when you start mixing the black and white into it, I think the more black it has, the more gray it has, it starts to shift a little more towards the yellow. So when I'm looking at this, comparing this color to kind of this middle orange, they call it 5YR, but it's like a middle orange, it looks a little bit pinker. So it would be, you know, the hue would shift a little more towards red. And then as we lower the chroma by adding black and white, or adding black and gray, it will start to shift a little bit more towards yellow. So that's actually pretty useful because a lot of the high chroma places in the face are actually pinker, like the cheeks and the lips. So so that's why I like using this warm cool palette to start off with, even though we're not even adding any of the alizarin crimson or the yellow ochre, which we can eventually add to shift the color even a little more. The warm cool study, I'm going to kind of ignore that hue difference and just focus on like kind of averaging the orange of the skin and taking transparent red oxide as my hue, as that orange, and then just shifting the saturation to be the chroma to be more colorful, less colorful, as we work through the different parts of the face, and of course the values as well. So so you'll see how that works when I do the study. So I'm going to take this to my value 5 spot there. And then for value 7, I'm going to take 1 part transparent red oxide and 3 parts white. So kind of basically the opposite of what I did for the value 5. So I have, say I have one part transparent red oxide. And again, I'm anticipating that I want to use these mixtures to make the intermediate mixture for the skin tone string. Sometimes I call these strings of values at a certain hue and saturation. So I'm going to want to make enough of this mixture that I can then mix them together, use it for, mixing other things. Okay, so that's going to be my transparent red oxide, and then I'm just going to do, let's see, it's not quite as much as I need. Might be a little too much. Let's see. It's about right. Maybe a little more white. I'm kind of contaminating it. This is This is not a system that has, what am I trying to say? This has like a lot of variables that are contaminating the system, but it's probably going to give me something close. Looks like it might be, could be a touch light, but I think it's pretty close, so. So feel free to adjust it, you know, if you feel like it's off, but I'm trying to see what happens if I just follow the recipes that I'm giving you. Alright, so for the value 7, I'm guessing it'll be a little bit less chromatic, a little bit less colorful, and it'll be a little bit darker than the printout. Actually, I'm getting it's a little lighter than the printout, so I may be a little bit light. So let's test our actual Munsell chart. So yeah, that's a little bit light, but it's darker than the value 8, so I think it's going to be fine. And you can kind of see that, you know, these two, the transparent red oxide mixture looks lighter than the gray at value 7, so probably is a little bit light. So if you can see that and you want to tweak it so that it's a little darker, that's fine. So that you want them to kind of visually feel the same. But like I said, when they're so colorful, when you're comparing something that's really colorful versus something that's really gray, sometimes it's hard to tell, you know, what value, what lightness or darkness it really is, because the saturation of the color kind of gets in our way of looking at the value. Sometimes squinting can help a little bit. So just checking my, okay, so for value 9, I'm going to take white and add just a speck of value 7. So same thing I did with the black and white mixture. Maybe I'll take about that much. Add a little bit of value 7. And I'll test it. I don't think I have a value 9 for my Munsell chart at this hue, but I can check it against my printout and see. It looks pretty close. So because we've added so much white, you know, as we add white to the transparent red oxide mixture, for these higher values, the lighter values, it's starting to get less and less saturated, less and less chroma, less and less colorful, because the white is diluting the color. So let's see, for value 3, so transparent red oxide, it's very transparent, but its mass tone, like when you squeeze it out in a big blob, it's approximately a value 2. So to get value 3, we're just going to add a little bit of value 5 to pure transparent red oxide until, you know, it kind of looks the same as the gray value 3. And then we're not going to have a value 1 for transparent red oxide. So we just want to lighten the pure color just a little bit. So value 3 at this, you know, at this chroma, meaning it has more of the transparent red oxide, it's going to be quite transparent. So when we're painting things like the lips, we may have to do it in several layers if we're just using these transparent pigments. And even the alizarin crimson that I mentioned in the materials list for, getting more of the true color of the lips, it's also pretty transparent. So generally, I'll do, even though I'm not glazing exactly, I'll do multiple layers to get a more opaque result in certain areas where the mixture of pigments is ending up to be more transparent. So usually that's in the redder, darker redder areas, or darker warmer areas. Okay, so that seems approximately the same as that value 3 gray. So I'll go ahead and put that there. And then let's see. So now we want to mix in between. I think as I mix in between, I'm not going to clean up my palette because it's all going to have some of these mixtures in it. One thing is that value 9 is probably going to be, we'll leave it the way it is. I won't mix it with gray because it is already lower in chroma. So that can kind of stand on its own. So let's see, so for value 7, I'm going to take, well, let's start with value 5 because we've been starting with value 5 for the most part. I'll just kind of scrape this up so I don't have too much lighter stuff contaminating it. So for value 5, see, my recipe is 2 parts value 5 transparent red oxide mixture, so this one, with 1 part value 5 gray. So I want 2 parts of this one and 1 part of this one. So 1, 2, 1, and then I'm just going to look and see if, okay. So now I'm starting to feel like I should have mixed up like giant piles of paint because this seems like it's, if I then want to mix in between the values, I'm going to start to run out. But it's fine, once you have these mixed, you can kind of like paint a little sample, like I said, so that you can match that sample later, and it goes a little bit quicker that way than following the recipes. Okay, so now I have something in between. Sometimes when you mix 2 colors like this together, you get like a result that's darker than you expect. This seems fine. It looks darker than the value 5 transparent red oxide mixture, but it looks about the same as the gray, so I could test it as well. So if I test it, so this I think is going to be approximately what we would call a chroma 4, which is kind of a medium chroma. So it's less colorful than just the transparent red oxide and white, but obviously not as gray as the black and white. I'm going to test it. Let's see. Just check our printout. So it's probably going to be a little darker. So yeah, it's a little darker than my value 5, and it's a little more yellow as well. So it's shifting now towards the yellow for some reason when I mix it with the gray. So checking it against the actual Munsell chart, it's pretty close to value 5, and it looks like it's more like a chroma, maybe between 3 and 4, so that's fine. Usually skin is kind of between chroma 3 and chroma 4. So that's what I was pretty much shooting for. Alright, so now we're going to do value 7. So value 7 is going to be 2 parts of the value 7 transparent red oxide mixture, and then 1 part the value 7 gray. So we'll mix those two together. I'm just cutting myself another paper towel square. So I had to go wash my hands because I had paint all over them. Normally when I'm painting, I don't actually get that much paint on myself, but when I'm mixing paint, I do. But I'm also gonna wipe off this little strip. Let's see, so 2 parts of the value 7 transparent red oxide. And 1 part of the gray. All right, so let's give that a test. So again, it's a little bit darker than the printout for value 7, but looks about the same chroma. It's also a little bit more to the yellow. And if we test here, it looks like, again, about a chroma 3, maybe a little light, but pretty close. So let's see, we're leaving value 9, so going to value 3, we'll do 2 parts of the value 3 transparent red oxide and 1 part of the value 3 gray. So basically we're just using the same formula for each of these 3. So we have, it's getting darker outside, and I do have another light on, but I'm just gonna change that. Okay. So just do it here. So 1, 2. I guess I'm doing kind of a small amount for the value 3, but So that seems like a nice rich brown color, so I'm just gonna test that. It's getting a little transparent, so see, so it's definitely darker than my value 3 on the printout, and let's see, but it's about the same as the see, the chroma 2 value 3 for the 5YR chart. So that seems good. And then for value 1, we're going to take 2 parts of just the value 3 transparent red oxide again, but this time instead of adding the value 3 gray, we're going to add black. So I'm going to get black again. So instead of using value 1, we want to darken it even more, so value 1 wouldn't bring value 3 down enough in value, so we have to use something slightly darker. Alright, so 1 part black, 2 parts of the value 3. And that should be kind of a dark rich brown. It's probably very similar to burnt umber, but it will be slower drying. Could maybe use a little more of the all right. So because there's no value 1 here, I'll just leave that blank, but you know, when I set out my palette, I'll have the pure transparent red oxide as well, maybe at value 2, and I'll have black and white also. So remember, this is value 1 mixed with a little bit of white. This is value 9 mixed with a little bit of black, so I don't have white and black out in this little column here, you know, little grid here, but I would set those out when I paint as well, doing a warm-cool study. So, so you can do just these mixtures and mix in between for what you need for the warm-cool study, and that just kind of simplifies things a little bit, so you don't have to do so many pre-mixtures. So I know it, you know, even with just these, it takes a lot of time, but once you get used to it, it's actually, I think it saves time in the long run, because you have a little more precision with, you know, kind of controlling your palette a little bit more. And I find that doing, you know, going through the extra steps to mix up the in-between values as well, and then some in-between chromas, is also really helpful as well. Especially if you have a way to save your paint, either in the freezer or with some clove oil.